Hey folks, here at OS Reviews. You're watching our retro throwback review of the Palm M105, a pretty basic Palm OS PDA that was released in the early 2000s, and it had a monochrome black and white display along with this virtual graffiti area that you use for handwriting recognition, and there was a small QWERTY keyboard that you could use for text entry, but it wasn't the greatest. Obviously, this is one of the ancestors that we have to modern smartphones, and this was back in the day when pocket PCs and PDAs were still the hype, as well as very convenient because it allowed you to organize events as well as calendars, sync it with a computer, and PalmOS was a relatively lightweight operating system, but it still allowed you to download a lot of third-party apps from a computer and manually sideload them onto this pocket computer. Otherwise, on the very back here, you have access to a bit of information as far as details here. You can see that there is a reset pin, and this one was powered by two AAA batteries, which lasted for a pretty good, I would say, 1 month period, 1 to 2 months, depending on when you used it, if you powered it on continuously before you needed to recharge it and swap out the batteries. The bottom here features access to a proprietary kind of serial port for connecting peripherals like keyboards, as well as syncing information with a Mac and a PC. The back also features access to a stylus, which you use to interact with the resistive touchscreen, which is not nearly as sensitive as capacitive screens that we have today, but it still works fairly well, and it's a good choice since we're using handwriting recognition here. What's interesting about the M105 was its highly customizable shell. It is made entirely out of plastic, and it wasn't really designed as the flagship series of the PalmOS devices back even in the day, so it doesn't have a aluminum construction. It doesn't feel super premium, but it is fairly durable and it doesn't attract too many fingerprints or smudges. So if you want to, you can actually peel this front plate completely off, which allows you to then customize it with perhaps a different color, a different template, as you can see there, and swap this out for a different look when you get tired of it, which is one of the selling points. Otherwise, on the front here, there's access to a dedicated power on-off switch. Holding the key down for a few seconds longer turns on the backlight, which is a pretty green and washed out looking backlight by today's standards, but still made it possible to see the screen under darker environments. Otherwise, again, below this relatively small display, you have access to that virtual graffiti area, which includes shortcuts for things like the QWERTY keyboard if you tap on the ABC key down below, as well as the number pad. There's also things for contrast, as well as going back home, the menu drag down notification drawer. There's things for the calendar and a quick search key for your applications. And finally, down below here, there are 4 commonly used PalmOS apps, which include the note-taking app, checklist, as well as a phone book and a calendar. And there's also scroll up and down controls if you didn't want to use the virtual scroller or tap on the screen itself. So taking a quick look at the user interface on here, again, it is extremely antiquated by 2016 standards, but it does share very strong DNA and resemblance to the eventual Palm Trio smartphones. And of course, we also got the PalmOS operating system, which was loosely based off of this. It completely refreshes the look, as well as makes it a bit more modern looking, and that came in the form of the Pixie, the Pre, and of course later HP purchased it, and now it's in LG's hand, so on and so forth. So taking a quick look now at some of these apps here, I actually haven't installed any additional apps beyond what was originally included on here. So this is the original firmware and version that you see running on this Palm M105. So up top, there's access to the battery status indicator. There's also things for navigating and filtering your application by specific different folders, such as for games. There's main, system, utilities, unfiled, as well as edit the categories to create your own. Again, it's a resistive screen, but it's not too bad as long as you're using your fingernails or if you have the stylus out. And there's also a decent viewing angle experience, I'd say. Obviously, it's just not a color screen, so there's not too much to display here, but you could always install third-party apps for things like viewing back images, again in black and white. A very basic video player was also available for download, but frame rates as well as video codec support was quite limited. Otherwise, the M105 was also limited by the fact that it didn't have an internal or an external expansion slot for things like SD cards, which meant that you were stuck with the very minimal amount of built-in RAM and built-in memory. So not the greatest for media consumption, and there's also no headphone jack, so it's not going to work as a digital MP3 player either. There's also things on here such as for checking out your address book, calendar, graffiti, how to use that, the notepad taking notes, and that's basically it. When you first turn the unit on or take out the batteries, you recalibrate the touchscreen so that you get things aligned properly once again. It also did have a very limited beaming technology as a wireless option on here, so if you had another Palm, you could beam information using infrared back and forth between each other. So that was the only wireless on here, no Bluetooth, no Wi-Fi. Taking a quick look at the notepad application on here, so if we wanted to, let's say, quickly insert a new message, I can tap on, let's say, new, and then doodle away until I'm content with what I'm drawing. So you can see here it actually works pretty well as a notepad application. I can also insert some text if I wanted to. I can write OS reviews, and all of these things are pretty easy to use. If I don't want this anymore, I can also delete it, or I can go through and use different types of erasers, pen sizes, so on and so forth. So it makes for a decent note-taking experience, which I can then take out of this by connecting it to a computer. So here I have a test that I drew here that a few days ago, so you can check out some of the sample maybe note-taking applications of this, maybe if you were using this in a class back in the day or in a business meeting. Otherwise, features on here are limited to, again, that address book, so very basic. There's a few samples provided by Palm, like their phone number, their support website. There's no web browsing capabilities on the M105 because there isn't Wi-Fi built in, but that's one of the features that were added to later Palm PDAs that were released. There's also a calculator, fairly basic. This one has actually a pretty large number layout, so key layout, which makes it possible to use your fingers a bit more easily. So here's what the contrast bar looks like. Allows you to change, again, the screen there more easily for viewing under sunlight. And there's also that clock application. Very basic alarms can be set. There's a beep, very mono speaker on here. Also a date book, graffiti, how to set that up, and to-do list. There's also preferences and a memo pad. So if we look at the memo pad here, there's a bit of basic info that was presented by Palm that you can also scroll up and down with. It makes for a decent kind of text viewer experience. I can also create my own. So if I wanted to do that, I can bring up the virtual QWERTY keyboard. You can see this is extremely small by today's standards. Your fingers cover this up, but pecking things out was a decent. You can also use the graffiti area. So tapping on this again pops this away. I can tap on something like, let's say, A, and you can see that it isn't the most accurate thing in the world, but it does work. So when you're content, you can also write numbers and symbols on this other side. So that was a very early form of handwriting recognition. So anyways, this has been an interesting retro look back at the Palm M105, one of the more budget as well as basic Palm PDAs back in the day. It was as no frills as you could get. It still ran on this Palm OS, but you didn't have any wireless features. It didn't have any preloaded applications. There were no web browsing and no expandable memory options, but it did have this customizable shell, this low price point, and a fairly durable build. You can check out more details about this in our retro article, but this has been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. This has been our throwback look at the Palm M105 PDA.